West Bank Robbery. I'm Bass and my co-host AP, which today stands for Asian Palestinian. We are joined today by Carl Zha. I'm a longtime fan of the Silk and Steel podcast. He's a many-time guest on Radio Warner, which is where I first heard about him. And I've also been working through his chronological history of China series. I'm only 400 episodes in. There's a lot of history. I don't know where they got it all from. How you doing, Carl?
Hi, how are you? Bassam, good to see you.
Yeah, I'm very glad that we got you on. I was worried that you'd be too busy surfing or, I don't know, flying a Chengdu J20 or
I haven't
something.
been surfing for a while, unfortunately, because I got an injury and now have a kid. I have a kid and another one on the way, so been
All
busy
right.
lately. I'd like to get back
Congratulations.
to surfing though.
Yeah, I
Congratulations.
remember when that
I'm
happened. I
I'm
was
trying
worried
to
that
be an
yeah,
evolutionary success.
you're working on it. You're
This
halfway
is
there.
this is a little off topic, but something that I was kind of interested in. What is childcare like in Indonesia? What is here in the US, it is absolutely crushing. We pay my wife, her entire paycheck basically goes to childcare. It's like she either works or stays home with the kid, and it's the same thing. We don't make any money either way.
I lucked out because in Indonesia the labor is plentiful and we have a living nanny. We pay her like the ongoing rate, which is about um it's about between 300 and 400 US dollars per month. We cover her. She lives with us. We cover her food, her lodging, and everything. But so that's like from a US perspective, that's just cheap. And I of course my salary is significantly reduced since I moved to Bali, but I still make enough to be able to afford to have a living nanny, to help with our kid, which really helps significantly because it allows my wife to continue to pursue her own career. And yeah, so I'm grateful for that.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, I mean,
You
my wife, she grew up with a an au pair from Sweden, I believe, or Norway, I forget exactly. And that was more of an option uh when we were growing up than now. Now it is totally out of the reach of any middle class American, which is difficult. The
I will say that
childcare is
I am
the childcare
available.
is pretty difficult.
If anybody needs, I'm a green belt. I can keep the kids safe. I'll go anywhere. I don't have any roots. I'll go wherever. I'm not tied down to this place. I'll do it for that going rate. I don't care. As long as you give me shelter, maybe dental. But yeah. Oh, but either way, guys, what we're here to talk about today is Palestine and China, their relationship through the ages. China has a very interesting history with the Middle East. Stronger and softer at times. And I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on like the current state of things. But before we get to that, I want to talk about Aaron Bushell and the self-immolation outside the Israeli embassy in DC. I've been to many protests at that fucking embassy, and I've like stood right where that guy died. So this shit kind of hit me pretty heavy. Um, I don't know. It seems like he's gotten the PFLP, Hamas, Ayatollah Khomeini, just like all these organizations. He's kind of become like a bit of a rock star in the Middle East. I don't know. AP, you got any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously his last words were, I think, especially devastating for me, when he said, "This is what the ruling class has decided will be normal." This really hit, I think that really to the heart of this. This is, what our the ruling class here in the West has decided is going to be normal going forward, and seeing that, uh, I mean, the footage was really horrifying, but this is what's decided for us. I mean, especially as we, climate catastrophe, rages on. I mean, what happens when 50 million people are immigrating around the world, and people say that, oh well, we can just starve to death a million people, that's just okay. That's totally fine. In a rules-based international order. I mean, so those are kind of like my
Yeah,
initial
that's kind of
thoughts.
something that I always try to stress to people, especially when they're like, why do these random assholes care about Palestine? You know, they're anti-Semitic or something. Like, I'm Palestinian, so they can't like pull that line on me because I'm like from there. But like, Palestine's your future. If that shit does not get taken care of, it's like the laboratory for all sorts of, you know, automated turrets mounted on walls around borders and that kind of shit. Like, that's coming if we don't take care of this. Any thoughts on this, Carl? How's this reaching the news over there?
And I will no longer complicit in genocide.
Actually, Aaron Bush now is also going viral in the Chinese social media space. I mean, I was reading a lot of comments on Douyin, which is the Chinese version of TikTok. Chinese, they have a domestic version of TikTok, which is Douyin, and they have the international version, which is known as
Oh yeah,
TikTok.
AP's on there all the time.
And
He's learning math.
and oh, you know, Douyin is great. I consider like Douyin content much more wholesome, much more interesting than whatever is on TikTok. And I actually made myself an account just to browse. And what some of the Chinese comment I've seen is like, Aaron Bushnell is a hero that America doesn't deserve. And they're saying, you know, he's a real Captain America. And yeah, there's a lot of Chinese digital artist Wu Heqiling actually made a digital art of Aaron Bushnell, which I tweeted out on my Twitter account. So you know he's worldwide now. You know, not just Middle East, U.S. He's, you know, I mean, everybody know who he is, what he stood for. Which is doubly ironic because if you look at all the mainstream media reporting in U.S., Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, they just says, "Oh, the U.S. Airman burned himself," you know, without even mentioning his last words in the headline or why he chose to end his life.
Yeah, you'd think he
You know,
just fucking
you know,
stepped on a match or fell into a puddle of gasoline. It's fucking ridiculous. That NPR article in particular, they've edited it now, but you can probably still find the original. It was just fucking disgusting.
Yeah, NPR has gotten progressively worse in the last 10 years. I mean, now it's pretty much just straightforward State Department propaganda.
A friend of mine always says NPR is always better in wartime. That's when they really pull out the big guns.
I mean, I think that's kind of for me, one of the most genius things about this act of protest was that Aaron was able to cut through all of that, all of the media narrative, any ability to control what his words were. He filmed it, he live streamed it, he had he sent it out to all of these media outlets so they could get a hold of it before it was clamped down on, and alternative media outlets, groups like Crime Think, you know, and he filmed it really well.
Yeah, I mean, it was fucking genius. Like the way
this
he did it. Like,
this is a Zoomer. I mean, this is a Zoomer. This is not a millennial guy. This is a TikTok generation guy. He filmed it like a TikTok dance video. I mean, we're talking about, you know, TikTok and Douyin. I mean, people have adopted a totally different way of acting in the world, and Aaron had captured that and saw how to use that to spread this message worldwide. And that's the real
and the fact that he's
genius of this. Sorry, go ahead.
And the fact that he's a U.S. serviceman, you know, like now the U.S. establishment has managed to alienate its recruitment pool for the U.S. empire, both on the right and the left, right? I mean, this is why we're having a recruitment crisis for the U.S. military. They can't even staff their aircraft carrier forward because, you know, people are just sick and tired of fighting the war for empire. Nobody wants to die for Israel. Nobody want. I mean, over 66% of the Americans want immediate ceasefire in Palestine, and the politicians we have are completely oblivious to the popular opinions inside United States. And what Aaron Bushnell's act is to make sure the popular opinion can no longer be brushed under the
I
carpet.
think it's really, I hope it's shaken up, at least like the military establishment or something. They should be at least a little bit worried. I've seen some reports and stuff that say that they're very concerned and they're kind of scrambling to try to contain this. I don't know if they're going to be able to, but yeah, like with things like this, like it's always like the worry that like it'll just get ignored or like the guy will be forgotten. But like I think this was pretty successful, and I don't think Aaron Bushnell is going anywhere.
Well, I mean, they have. I mean, this is as I mean, I remember Bassem telling me now several years ago when the gentleman burned himself in protest of inaction on climate change in DC that people do this all the time, and that's really unfortunate that the U.S. has become so inured to death that this is a regular protest and it can just be pushed under the rug. And again, I mean, I really have to hand it to Aaron that he was able to cut through all of that. And yeah.
All right. Well, I think that about says it. Let's get on to Biden's relationship with Palestine. So let's go back. I'll start us off here. We go way back. Do the Chinese know about Arabs? Yes, they do. The Silk Road exists. So they've been dipping in and out of there. They've had a much more long-term relationship with the Middle East than, say, the United States has, or the UK or France. They've had a much more long-term economic relationship with the region. Things kind of slowed down in the 18th century as Chinese power was not at its height.
Yeah, I mean, there's no comparison, right? U.S. only has less than 300 years of history, and China, Arab relationships dates back thousands of years. As soon as we have documented sources, maritime Silk Road that runs through South China to the Indian Ocean, and the Indian Ocean basin trade has been running for thousands of years. After the advent of Islam, and we have documented arrival of Muslims on the shore of China as early as 7th century. It's pretty shortly after, in fact, after the advent of Islam on the Arabian Peninsula. You have mosques in Guangzhou, China, that dates from that period. Over 1,000-year-old mosques, and there's Arab and Persian communities all along the coast of China. When Marco Polo went to China, he found these thriving communities of Arab and Persian merchants on the southeastern Chinese coast. They have established communities, and they have put down roots because they usually take on local wives. So at that time, the trade is carried on by determined by the monsoon winds, because the monsoon winds in Indian Ocean, they blow one direction for 6 months and then they switch direction for another 6 months. So what people do is when the wind blows one direction, for example, they will travel from Arabia to China, and they will stay in China and Southeast Asia for 6 months, do trading, and then they catch the boat, sail back, and they form new communities. This is how the Muslim community in China got started. And obviously, has longer history than United States. I mean, the United States only have a couple hundred years of history.
Yeah, when you put it like that, Islam's kind of the China of the 7th century. Real meteoric industrial rise. There's not paying taxes is a great deal. Okay, so let's zoom back a bit. The Chinese know about Arabs. We get that. They've been around way longer. What is China's early relationship? Let's start with the. I'm not too particularly interested in the pre-communist periods involvement with Palestinians specifically, just because Chinese and Palestinian nationalism kind of they came up a bit later, and they both kind of matured around the same time, I feel like. talk to me about like early communist China's like perceptions of the Middle East and like the ways they dealt with it. I understand that many countries in the Middle East were some of the first to recognize the People's Republic, and like support their bid to get their like UN Security Council seat and that kind of thing. Though Israel was the first one. I don't know if anybody asked that much for them. I think they just kind of threw that out there. But yeah, tell me a little bit about that.
Oh, you're sorry, you're cutting out a little bit. What is the time frame you're talking
Let's
about?
go with like the mid 40s to like early 50s period. Like what was the like very early relationship with the Middle East? I understand China was very diplomatically isolated, but it found some of its first footholds in the international community.
Immediately after World War II, Chinese Civil War got started. So the Chinese were pretty busy fighting themselves for a good 4 years until 1949, the establishment of the People's Republic. Right after this, the establishment of the People's Republic of China, China has always supported the Palestinian self-determination. In fact, in 1955, when the Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai went to the Bandung Conference, aka the first Afro-Asiatic conference that was held in Bandung, Indonesia, attended by mostly nations that coming out of the new decolonial struggle in Asia and Africa. China was very explicit in supporting the Palestinian right of return. Bandung Conference is also what really freaked out the CIA, because they saw all these decolonized countries coming together, forming the long online movement that was kind of outside of the Cold War framework.
It was a really big deal. It represented over half of the world's population at this conference, and it's also where China picked up a bunch more votes to give them their Security Council seat.
Exactly, and basically China and India at that time kind of emerged as a leader of the non-aligned movement. And there's also attended by I think Nasser and attended the meeting. I believe I see a photo of him with Zhou Enlai and also the Indonesian president Sukarno. And at that time Indonesia is also trying to build socialism in Indonesia. The Indonesian Communist Party at that time was the world's third largest communist party after Soviet Union and China. So this really freaked out CIA, and that led to the 1965 coup, which the CIA helped the Indonesian military massacre 1 million people, suspected communists, suspected leftists, union organizers, and ethnic Chinese. So it was like I came to Bali 4 years ago. I mean, the legacy still persists today, because a lot of the people, Bali is now the tourist paradise, but a lot of people are not aware of this dark history. So when now developers are bulldozing over beaches to put up hotels, they're still digging up mass grave from 1965, 1966.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And is there a lot of Chinese tourism as well? I imagine it's pretty close, right? And is there a lot of consciousness of that in China? The racial nature of the massacre?
Yes. The 1965 massacre was mainly aimed toward the communists, the leftists, but of course, because the ethnic Chinese by association, because China was a communist state, they also got massacre along with it. But then in 1998, this was during the Asian financial crisis, and the Chinese again became the ethnic Chinese. Because their predominance over the economy, they became the scapegoat. So there was a massacre in 1998, which is much more fresh.
Oh, I didn't know about that.
yeah, there was much more fresh in the memory of people both in China and also among the Chinese Indonesian community. Like a lot of the Chinese Indonesian I talk about, they still say, they have like suffered PTSD from 1998 because
Yeah, I
remember what
bet.
happened in Jakarta. And but there's a lot of tourism in Bali coming from China. Before the COVID time, it was about like over 3 million Chinese tourists visit every year. The COVID took a toll, obviously, and now the tourism from China is slowly coming back, but the airline ticket needs to be the price needs to come down to for the tourism to resume. This is a problem with China, with United States as well. The U.S. and China just agreed to reopen like 100 restore 100 more flights between U.S. and China, U.S. and China. Like I remember when I traveled to China from U.S. in October last year, tickets weren't cheap, and I couldn't get direct flights from JFK to Beijing. I had to fly from Raleigh to JFK, and from JFK to Hong Kong, and then from Hong Kong to Beijing. So like it added
got
many
out of
more
Raleigh.
hours. Yeah. Well, I'm sorry.
At least you got out of Raleigh.
I mean, Raleigh is actually pretty nice. I mean, like I chose the time of the year when it's really, really hot in Bali, and I know it's relatively nice.
You're a snowbird.
Carolina. Yeah. I'm a snowbird.
All right, so let's go forward a little bit here, okay? Let's get to the mid-60s. This is when the real interesting stuff comes up. And while I was researching this, like I'm pretty familiar with like the Soviet Union and like the Soviet bloc support and like Yugoslavia and stuff, support for the Palestinians. And I discovered that's because the USSR collapsed and the GDR opened up its archives. I messaged Carl like a week ago. I'm waiting on some documents. I'm like requesting some stuff from like the PLO, like research center. And I'm trying to figure out what the Chinese were doing specifically. I thought you would get numbers. Like the Soviets, you can find out, oh, they sent like this many AKs. They trained this many people. There were these meetings. The Chinese state did not collapse. I've been fucking spoiled by the collapse of the Soviet Union. I had like, there's really not that much information on like the covert operations and that kind of stuff.
This guy's gonna kill his communist cred by saying he was spoiled by the collapse of the Soviet Union.
They left me that. They left me the sick documents, dude. There's so many documents. I love documents, dude. But yeah, so sorry. In the mid-60s, okay, the head of the PLO ends up going to China, and this is kind of the start of the material support. Shortly after this, several dozen, maybe over 100 something PLO militants were trained in China. I do know Zhou Enlai was particularly concerned in true guerrilla fashion that you guys don't really have a great country nearby to hang out in and train. But beyond that, they still, they sent them weapons and that kind of thing. Can you talk a bit more about this period?
Yeah, because Mao firmly believed in a world revolution, so he supported anti-colonial struggle, national liberation struggle all over the world, in Africa as well, Africa, Southeast Asia, Latin America, as well as Palestine. So China funded Palestinian resistance groups, invited them to China to provide military training, provided them with weapons, and they supported the Palestinian Liberation PLO, and they supported both Fatah and also the Popular Front for Liberation of Palestine, PFLP, and also the Democratic Front for Liberation of Palestine, DFLP. They supported the whole gamut of them. You can Google and find online of the Palestinian resistance fighters opening up Mao's Red Book.
That's one of my favorites. That's a baller photo. They've got their guns, the feels are wrapped around their face, and they're reading the book. It's good to read. I think that's really the main thing to take away from that.
And Israeli intelligence have discovered like the Chinese training menus, how to use like Chinese weapons, still in Chinese text, right? But with like Arabic translation next to it. And so because this was the period when, even though China was still desperately poor country, but Mao firmly believed, the world revolution is just over the corner, and he supported national liberation movement all over the place. That did change in 1978 after Mao's death. Deng Xiaoping came to power, and then Deng Xiaoping made a decision to stop exporting revolution. Now, this was made for several factors. One is that China at that time was surrounded by a lot of hostile anti-communist neighbors. So, and when China exported revolution in 1966, for example, when China sponsored the Burmese communist insurrection and supported the Malaysian communist insurrection, Filipino communist insurrection, Thailand communist insurrection. This led to the worsening of ties between China and all its neighboring states, and Indonesia, as already mentioned, after the 1965 coup, Indonesia became very the Indonesian Communist Party, the third largest communist party in the world, it got wiped out, and the Indonesian military that came to power was very the junta under dictator Suharto was led a very anti-communist state.
Not very well.
I still remember my wife told me she grew up watching this kind of propaganda film made in Indonesia back then about the coup, and I watched a little bit of it. In the beginning, it's these like it just shows the Muslims praying in the mosque, and then these communists come in literally with hammer and sickle, attacking people and killing people. And so this is how this is a kind of the propaganda that was waged on the population at that time. And so in an effort to improve ties with its neighboring countries, in the 1978, Deng Xiaoping cut off all the military aid to all over the world. So they stopped exporting revolution. They cut off the military aid to the Palestinian resistance group as well. But China maintained diplomatic support for Palestine. So, for example, in 1988, when Palestine PLO declared the establishment of Palestinian state, the Palestinian PLO office in Beijing got turned into the embassy of Palestine in Beijing. Yasser Arafat has visited China 14 times. And I grew up in China in 1980s. I remember seeing Yasser Arafat on CCTV all the time, on the Chinese state TV all the time. So he's referred to as an old friend of China. And the Chinese support for the establishment of an independent Palestinian state with its East Jerusalem as its capital has been the stated Chinese policy forever. That has never changed. And what then in 1989, after the Tiananmen Square protests, China was under diplomatic isolation from the West. And then, shortly after, a couple years after, the Eastern Bloc collapsed. So there was a collapse of the Soviet Union and all the Eastern Bloc countries. So China was trying to break out of the diplomatic isolation. And you went on a diplomatic offensive. That's when China finally established normalizing ties with the anti-communist state like Singapore, Indonesia, and Saudi Arabia, South Korea. But in 1990, around the same time, the peace negotiation between PLO and Israel was underway to pave way for the signing of Oslo Accord. So then there was a rapprochement between China and Israel that led to the normalization of ties between China and Israel in 1992. So when I was in China, I lived in China from my birth in 1976 to 1990. The period of time I lived in China, China did not recognize the state of Israel. Like Israeli citizens could not get a visa to come to China unless they unless they have.
You shouldn't have left. You were fucking holding that wall up. You were there. You left and they fucking changed it. You take your eyes off it for 1 second. the Chinese support,
you know,
I don't know. Sometimes I feel like it's often both understated and overstated in some ways. Like the DFLP is like a great thing to focus on to like analyze like Chinese involvement in Palestine. They received a lot of weapons and arms and stuff. My dad, being more of a Soviet partisan, I asked him like, what did the DFLP? Because the DFLP, I should mention, listeners, Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, was a more like Maoist aligned group, or like more like guerrilla, like Castroist. Like they were more of a mid-60s militant organization, whereas the PFLP was more traditionally like hardline Marxist-Leninist Soviet style communist. And I asked him, Dad, what did the DFLP do when Mao died? And he had a little catty. He's like, they were very adaptable. They were very adaptable with their ideology, but they made it work. And I'm like, okay, you gotta respect that. He's like, I really respected it. Those guys, they had those guys in lockstep. They could fucking swivel on anything. But like, even though China did end up pulling out from a lot of its more like covert, like guerrilla funding, the Palestinians still did receive a lot of support through neighboring countries. Like Egypt ended up getting up a lot of support, not a lot of support, like a good amount of support. China was very poor at the time. Like you have to like really consider like what they could give. Like, you know, they were doing about as much as Cuba, basically. You know, they just didn't have much in the country. There was so much more to rebuild. But yeah, even today, you go to Gaza, you can find these fucking crazy Chinese high caliber assault rifles. They look like something out of Halo Reach or something. They got them from Libya, which the Chinese had sold like a bunch of arms to Libya. And you know, even you look at Yemen, they're still using like Chinese missiles. The Iranians are still doing it. The Chinese have, well, they may not have given like the same like pound for pound support as the Soviet Union. A lot of their fingerprints have held on a lot longer with a lot of the technological exchange they participated in. Yeah, overall, you know, China's done a good amount. One thing I am curious of, and I don't understand, I've been trying to figure this out for years at this point. I can't find a good book on it. I'm afraid I'll be lied to. Like, I'm afraid a book will trick me, but I don't know what happened. How did the Sino-Soviet split impact China's like relations with Palestine, or really just guerrilla movements in general in the region? Because I know like China supported ejection of the Soviet trainers and stuff from Egypt. It seems like they were fucking at each other's throats.
Yeah, so the China-Soviet-U.S. policy toward the Middle East, it's a fascinating study of history and evolution of diplomacy, because if people remember during the founding of Israel, that's when the Soviet actually supported the state of Israel, because they thought Israel was giving it to the British imperialists, right? Because before it was a British mandate of Palestine, and they thought by supporting these Israelis, they're sticking it to the British, and that was later changed, because U.S. also was more kind of pull toward the founding of Israel, because U.S. had a long-standing relationship with, for example, the House of Saud in Saudi Arabia, but that all changed in the late 50s and early 60s, and with the Soviet leaning more on the Arab side, and U.S. just went all the way to bat for Israel. Now, China, so the result of Sino-Soviet split is playing out across a global stage. For example, in Angola, they supported different factions.
Yeah, we just finished up
and also in the Horn.
Highly recommend it.
Yeah, and also in the Horn of Africa. But in some cases, in terms of support for Palestine, support for example, the War of Liberation in Vietnam, the China and Soviet policies were largely aligned, but they're aligned, but they're independent of each other, because China and Soviet Union weren't on the speaking terms at this point. So China actually supported all the Palestinian resistance group, not just the Maoist PFLP. He supported Fatah, he supported PFLP, because it rightly saw Israel as an outpost of Euro-American settler colonialism in the Middle East. Like I said, in 1980s, when I was in China, Israeli citizens that cannot get their visa to China unless they're dual passport holders. If they have a passport of another country, then that's the only way they can come to China with a visa. That was changed in 1992 because at that time the peace negotiation between PLO and Israel was fully underway. Oslo Accord was signed a year later, and
Yeah, I don't.
China is not going to be more. Yeah,
I
China is
don't
not going to
blame
be more.
anybody for that. Sorry.
Yeah,
continue,
China is.
Carl.
Yeah, China is not going to be more pro-Palestinian than the Palestinian themselves, right? So from that point, China has always advocated, basically from 1990s onward, China has advocated for the two-state solution with the establishment of independent Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital, and Xi Jinping actually reaffirmed China's position in 2016 when he went to speak at Arab League conference in Cairo. And a lot of the American commentators were surprised by that. And I remember there was one American podcaster, Eric Olander, who runs the China in Africa podcast. And he's like, oh my God, why did China do that? That's so stupid. I was like, what? This is not a new Chinese position. This has been the Chinese position since forever. China has always, Xi Jinping didn't say anything new. He's reiterating the policy of Mao, policy of Deng Xiaoping. China has always said it supports an independent Palestine and with East Jerusalem as its capital. This Chinese position has never changed. And it's just that these go ahead.
No, they've just been remarkably consistent. Like, despite military or like financial aid going up and down, they've been remarkably consistent on their like positions in like international bodies and that kind of thing. Like, they never really like flip flopped ever. They've just been very standard. And one thing that I really thought was fucking dope as hell was I believe it was the Chinese UN ambassador. I think it was this week. He just said, he got up at the press conference and he's like, legally Palestinians can fucking kill you guys. Like, they have a right to resist. Like, they're cool, man. This is like legal. It's not a crime. They're allowed to fucking do backflips before they like blow up your tank. Like, that's just normal. That's international law, dude.
It's really interesting because us living in the US, we have a government that is always preaching rules-based international order, rules-based international order, rules-based international order. But you see time and time again, it's rules, rules for me, but not for thee. Like any agreement that we have, I mean, this is Iran is finding this, like any agreement that we have, it can be torn up at any moment. And I think that's kind of what's infuriating a little bit to Americans when they see that China is consistent in policy. Is like, what do you mean you're still honoring your position that you've held? Like, it's almost like an attack on our morals, right? And our convictions. I think that's another big thing. I mean, we already moved on from Aaron Bushnell, but I mean, I think this is a big attack on people. Is that we see that people who have convictions and actually follow rules and are like, okay, if you say that you're going to do that, and I'll say I'm going to do that, then I expect that we're going to follow through with that, at some point later. That's an attack on all the fucking shifty criminals that run our government and run our institutions and everyone wants to be in this country. It's absolutely wild, and it's really revealing about them.
Yeah, like American actions have been very consistent on Palestine, but their rhetoric has changed dramatically over and over and over.
The Chinese diplomat Ma Ximin, who spoke at the ICJ last Thursday, I mean, he's actually a senior Chinese diplomat. He's pretty high up the ranks, and he cited the UN Charter, and he cited, look, it's under the international law the Palestinian has an inalienable rights to fight against their colonial oppressors. It's not. First of all, China has never labeled Hamas as terrorists. Like it's like Israel always like, do you condemn Hamas? Do you condemn Hamas? And China is saying, oh, like the anti-colonial struggle is justified under international law, and and he's right that they cited the UN Charter. The site is a 1973 resolution that Palestinian can and have the right to resist colonial oppression under any means necessary.
The UNGA Resolution 3070 of 1973, I quote, reaffirms the legitimacy of the people's struggle for liberation from colonial and foreign domination and alien subjugation by all available means, including armed struggle, end of quote. This recognition is also reflected in international convention. For example, the Arab Convention for Suppressing of Terrorism of 1998 affirms, I quote, the right of peoples to combat foreign occupation, aggression by whatever means, including armed struggle, in order to liberate their territories and secure the right to self-determination and independence, end of quote. Armed struggle in this context is distinguished from acts of terrorism. It is grounded in the international law. This distinction is acknowledged by several international conventions. For example, Article 3 of the OAU Convention on the Prevention and Combating the Terrorism of 1999 provides that, I quote, the struggle waged by peoples in accordance with the principle of international law for their liberation of self-determination, including armed struggle, against colonialism, occupation, aggression, and domination by foreign forces, shall not be considered as terrorist acts.
So this marks a big departure from from the position of most of the Western government. And I like who like even I don't think even Russia is as forthright in the support for the Palestinian resistance as China is. And then predictably this coverage, there was a very little coverage in the Western mainstream media about China's statement, and whatever little reaction is some, I saw some white women under the tweet saying, oh, the statement, I agree with the statement, but I'm not sure if it's China, it's the China that should be making the statement. They're still committing genocide against the Uyghurs. And I open up this woman's profile, and he's running some kind of PR firm. So she's literally like a show for hire. And then you have Hamas, literally Hamas saying, we appreciate China's position on this. We really appreciate China's support. And then you have some white women saying, oh, I don't know if China should be the one saying this.
What should Joe Biden say it? Is he going to say, actually, Palestinians can kill whoever they want? Like, how's that go?
I mean, the Uyghur genocide is a perfect example of another thing where the convictions of a country are attacking the morals of another country. All these Zionists, they constantly say, what could we possibly do? Like, how could we do this better? What do you mean we could do this better? And I mean, and they say there was whatever the 10/7 terrorist attack was so horrible that we just must kill and basically unlimited number of people. And then look at China. There were terrorist attacks in China for several years, I believe. the subway knife attacks, and then also the massive riots. And did China go around and just massacre like tens of thousands of people? Or this is the funny thing that everyone brought up on the early part of the war, but they kept saying, if you proportionally compare it to America, well, if we proportionally compare it to China, how many Uyghurs would we need to be killed to
Oh
to
my
match?
God.
And it's totally absurd. And yeah, I think that's one of the reasons that you
Well,
haven't seen that
that's
brought
the
up as
thing.
much.
That's the thing. How many Uyghur did China kill? Right? Nobody
Exactly.
can answer that question. I mean, this is at this point they're just using Uyghur genocide as a pure distraction from what Israelis are doing in Palestine. Because I remember, like in 2014 when Israel was bombing Gaza, and suddenly all the mainstream media was flooded with stories about how Xinjiang is the world's largest open air prison. Oh, no, I'm sorry, this happened in 2018, and then they're suddenly flooded with the story how Xinjiang is the world's largest open air prison. This is so blatant media manipulation, because everybody knows Gaza is the world's largest open air prison, and they literally just gaming the search engine by flooding the news with calling Xinjiang the largest open air prison in the world. And every time that Israel do some really fucked up shit, you're gonna have Uyghur genocide trending on Twitter. For anybody who's paying attention to this stuff, it's just blatant manipulation, but there's still people falling for it. Well, I don't know. At this point, I think there's two type of people. There's the truly ignorant and the liars, right? These are the two type who regularly cite Uyghur genocide to distract people from what's the real atrocity that's being committed in Gaza right now.
I'm kind of like of two minds of it, because like there are like two types of people, I think. Like there's the one who are just like very obviously just trying to misdirect people's attention to attack China, which is very helpful for America and kind of Israel. And then like if there's like an Arab uncle on Facebook and he's like, we gotta save this country, this country, this country, this, he's got a big list of all the struggles, and he's like, and Palestine. I'm like, whatever, that's fine. At least you've got Palestine in the name. That's cool with me. But like, it's so patently obvious. Like you go back to ISIS or whatever. Like all these Islamists that are like very Western backed. They never criticized Israel. They never attacked Israel. They're always looking for a different country to go for. They go kill a bunch of Arabs or Muslims wherever they are, instead of the number one hated thing in the entire Middle East, the broader Muslim world, from Malaysia or from Palestine to Indonesia. It's the most hated place on earth. Why aren't you ever going there? Why aren't you ever fucking putting that? It's a very
ISIS
good issue.
Just recently. Yeah, it's like Israel. They keep on trying to draw equivalent between Hamas and ISIS, and then ISIS come out with a statement, literally criticizing Hamas on only focusing on like a narrow national issues. It's like, you got to be kidding me! Like ISIS, like was largely not saying silent on the current Palestinian the current atrocity in Palestine, and then when they do speak up, they're criticizing Hamas for narrowly focusing on issue focusing issue on national issues, on national liberation issues, not focusing on broader. It's totally
it's
bogus.
The most broad struggle. Everybody loves Palestine. We're very popular people. Everybody loves them. It's it wins hearts and minds. Like, Jesus Christ. Like, Hamas literally killed every ISIS guy in Gaza. Like, they killed every single one. There was like a tiny offshoot of like Palestinian ISIS that was most likely fucking funded by the Mossad. Because you know what they would do? They'd go out into the corner. They had the shittiest rockets. They couldn't build any because they had no friends. They'd shoot off one rocket, and then Israel would fucking assassinate like 25 people. The comparison. That's, my God, I forgot about that. That feels like 100 years ago. These wars are normally very short. Like, I kind of chart my life's progress through the wars, and this one being so long has really kind of like warped my perception. I feel like it's, it doesn't feel like it's been that long. So let's talk about China in the future. I know China is pretty financially involved with Israel, but it's also financially involved with the other states in the Middle East. I know they've recently helped broker the like Saudi-Iran rapprochement. what is the future here? I know they own a lot of Haifa. That's where half my family's from. Are they going to shut it down? Are they going to cut them off? What do you think China's like foreign policy in the Middle East looks like 15, 20 years from now? You know, like where's it going?
So before October 7th, China was in a very unique position of having a fairly friendly tie with Iran, with Saudi Arabia, and Israel at the same time. But after October 7th, there's a decidedly downturn in the China-Israeli relationship. You know, I just before our show, I just watched another video where this Israeli commentator said, "Oh, there's a chill in the relationship between China and Israel after October 7th."
For centuries, China has been the biggest friend of the Jews, and until recently, that's now all changed.
Last couple of months, we have seen the relationships between China and Israel going very frosty in comparison to last year.
Yeah.
So after October 7, things have changed drastically, and we have seen, let's say, a stall. We have seen a certain chill in the relationship between the Israelis and the Chinese.
You know, look. Well, I wonder why. You know, like what happened in October 7th? What happened after October 7th that prompted this chill in the relationship? You know, maybe all the Israeli atrocities that's committed in Israeli relationship is definitely on the downturn. You know, in the China-Israeli relationship started. There was a rapprochement that started in the late 1980s that continued to the full diplomatic relationship in 1992. At that time, basically, Israel served as a conduit to transfer Western technology from particular military technology from like the United States to China. This is something that U.S. has repeatedly complained about.
They keep doing it. They did it with the Soviet Union too. They just took everybody's shit and sold it to the other guy. They were really fucking double dealer. And America was still backing them up fully. America was gonna get fucking like pocket picked the entire time and they didn't give a shit. It's shocking how rude they are. They're a very rude country. That's not how you make friends, guys.
Well, I mean, Netanyahu was caught on tapes, you know, like 20 years ago, in 2000, saying like, "Yeah, don't worry about America. You know, America is gullible. You know, they will always support us no matter what."
שהמחיר יהיה כבד מצוא, כרגע המחיר לא כבד מצוא, גם זו התקפה רבת היקף על הרשות הפלסטינית. תביא אותם לפחד שהכל מתמוטט.
ואז, רגע, אבל אז השוק העולם יגיד מה אתם חושבים? אתה לא מפחד מהעולם, ביבי.
במיוחד היום עם אמריקה, אני יודע מה זה אמריקה. אמריקה זה דבר שאפשר להזיז אותו בקלות, להזיז לכיוון הנכון.
הם אומרים שהם בעדינו, אבל כאילו...
לא יפריעו לו.
אז שאני אנחנו עושים איזה משהו, אז הם...
יש שם נניח שהם אומרים משהו. אז אמרו, 80% מהאמריקאים תומכים בנו. זה אבסורד, יש לנו שם תמיכה כזאת, ואנחנו אומרים מה נעשה עם...
And I mean, this is why right now you are seeing Israeli official propaganda is literally them just tweeting out their war crimes, right? And it's almost like they're raising a middle finger to the world, say, you know what, we're just gonna do this. Guess what? You can't do anything because we got the full support of the United States, and they do. But right now, the China-Israeli relationship is changing. It's definitely entering a downturn. But this is if there's ever to be a peace negotiation. I see China possibly could serve the role they did in the Saudi-Iran rapprochement by brokering the Saudi.
I think so. I think so. I don't think there's really any
deal.
illusions that the United States is a good broker for the situation, because up until, I don't know, 2014-ish, the United States was seen, oh, we're going to be in the middle and we'll help these guys figure it out. We don't really know what's going on over here, but we'll help them sort it out. And I don't think anybody buys that anymore. Like, I don't even think Saudi Arabia can go and say that publicly, that America is going to be the one to help broker a peace deal or something. So I think, yeah, China's a very good candidate.
Yeah, I think this is this might be a little bit too much history to go back into, but this is what just really interests me about China's perspective on everything, is they seem to always look for a diplomatic solution first, and war is seen as the absolute last resort, which is supposedly what the US's policy is war is the last resort, but
We're not at
it
war.
seems to be that China has historically, at least since China hasn't been at war since the 70s, right? And they've
so-
had numerous territorial disputes with other countries that have been able to been solved diplomatically, and they've been pushing for. I mean, we briefly touched on this with even with like the supposed Uyghur genocide. Like, you're seeing a diplomatic, you're not seeing a hammer first approach. Let's go in and let's just like bash every dude until they stop being Islamists or whatever. Like, let's talk to people and let's try to talk them out of their beliefs or whatever. And you're seeing that with in Ukraine as well. China has pushed from the very beginning, let's find a diplomatic solution first. And it's really this is really interesting to me, because the US has never been able, they feel like it's just we got to hit them harder, and if they don't give up, we just hit them even harder. And that just seems absolutely absurd.
It's very amazing to me. It's just like, it seems like they're fairly competent as like a government, which is very astounding to us here. But
maybe that's the part that's driving me crazy.
It's crazy.
This is a government that's competent.
Normal. They can be normal for an hour without freaking everybody out. There is one thing I wanted to ask you about. So back to the like China-Israel like economic relationship, and like Israel just stealing tech and selling it to whoever. There's been pushes. There's been little bubblings coming out of the State Department, trying to get Israel to sever a lot of its economic ties with China, because they've been growing pretty rapidly. And I can very easily see a situation where the U.S. kind of forces Israel to abandon its Chinese economic ties, becoming a much weaker economic power in most respects. And it kind of just untethers whatever incentives are there for China to really continue to support them in whatever ways they're doing.
You are exactly right on that. In fact, the biggest push for China for cutting the Israeli-China tie has been United States State Department and Pentagon. U.S. has been hard pressed on Israel for doing military technology transfer to China forever, and United States is the one that's getting upset at the China operated port in Haifa. They have been complaining to Israel about allowing China to take over Haifa port. But lately, Israeli position has always also been converging to the U.S. position. You see all these. You see Israeli condemning China for Uyghur genocide. I mean, this is the most ridiculous thing. But they have been doing that for the last couple of years. And you see the most right-wing Zionist organizations, group, and people in United States are accusing China of Uyghur genocide, right? And you have the U.S. ambassador to UN. At 1 minute she's tweeting about condemning China for Uyghur genocide. The next minute she's tweeting like, we got to stand behind Israel no matter what. And so that is also the responsible for the downturn in the China-Israeli ties. I agree, because United States, the Washington elite right now they're pushing really hard to decouple, they're both United States, but all the U.S. vassal states and its proxy states, to decouple from China economically, politically, and to a certain extent they are working. I mean, especially in Europe, because European vassals just can't say no. Same thing for Japan and South Korea. Israel, for a while, it has a degree of kind of, they have bit more leverage. They have more room to maneuver because they believe U.S. will support them no matter what. But I think in the end, I think you're right. The final decoupling between Israel and China, the final push is going to come from the United States. And
I think it's
you're
going to be
also
good.
right, because
I think it's going to be a good development. China or Israel being cut off from the Chinese economy would be fantastic. And China being untethered by any sort of economic incentives, I think would, that's a generally positive development for the world. China will survive without the Israeli economy, but I don't know if Israel will.
And you're right. I mean, the biggest benefit, Israel had provided China in the past was to serve as this conduit for military tech transfer. But that channel is getting shut off by Washington right now. And Haifa port or whatever, China can get another port in Syria. I mean, it's like these ports in East Mediterranean are interchangeable. I mean, and also China is also stepping up its effort to court the Arab world at the present. So it makes much more sense for China to fully align with the Arab world and the Muslim world at this point.
But in the end, we see that China is leaning more towards the, let's say, the Arab side in this stance.
Johnny, I think you're hedging a little bit here. It's not leaning more towards; it's leaning entirely. I mean, there's no gray area in terms of China's position on this, on the war, on the Palestinians, even to some extent on Hamas here. They have never called Hamas a terrorist organization. They have never acknowledged that the acts of October 7th were an act of terrorism. They have never acknowledged the Israeli position on this side. It seems to me pretty binary that they are 100% aligned with the Palestinian cause here, both in the West Bank and in Gaza.
So, I mean, it just doesn't make sense for China to stick by Israel the way United States has been doing, basically sacrificing its soft power in the world stage. This is why you are right now seeing.
Yeah,
that's why you're seeing.
We gotta support him. We're talking to him. I don't know, man.
And I mean, the NATO military tech is no longer, top of the line. Like Iranian drones are just as good, and you can get those probably easier if you're not supporting Israel. Like.
And much cheaper,
exactly
we have seen how it actually works out in the battlefield. Even though United States spent nearly $1 trillion on defense budget, but they cannot supply Ukraine with artillery shells. In the modern land battle, artillery is still king, and Russia is outproducing all the NATO country combined, and Russia and North Korea are outproducing
yeah, good for them.
Yeah,
good
so
for
I mean,
Koreans. I'm very impressed. Okay, guys, we've been having fun for a little bit too long. I think we got to start wrapping things up. I do want to not ask. I'm telling you, please go listen to Silk and Steel. This is Carl Zha. It's a Silk and Steel podcast and many other things. He's been on the news. He surfs. He's very handsome. You can also, if you're watching this on his YouTube or if you're listening to this on our audio feed, go watch the video. He's a very handsome young man. He has a loving wife and family. He lives in the sunniest place on earth. He's doing a great time, and he's got great China analysis. I've really found him very valuable. I am working through the chronological history of China.
The beaming, shining face. I felt both me and Vasa were a little shabby, totally unkempt, and then we have this guy who's clean shaven and he looks younger than both of us, even though he's probably 10 years older than both of us.
We were scrambling. I'm like, do I need a hat? What do I do? Should I put on a suit?
I was born in 1976, so you guys can call me Uncle Carl.
Oh my god.
Got it. All right, guys.
Well, you absolutely look great, and the lighting in your video is really great. Bali is doing you wonders. Stress-free life.
Oh my god.
All right.
I could use one of those. All right, guys. How do we usually end this? You're right. Free Palestine, fuck the police. All right.
Free Palestine. Have a great day.
Free Palestine.